more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KBTA, and we're here once a week, every week. And if you've missed anything, you can go to the website, livingyourinspiredlife.org, and tune in and tune up to develop your power perspective. Please, we've done such good work. I encourage you to go and listen to the shows that have come before this one, because you will be inspired and filled up to overflowing. And I've actually had a couple of people say, wow, I have to put it on pause when I'm listening on the website because I have to go get a box of Kleenex because it moves me so much. So livingyourinspiredlife.org. Check it out. So today I'm excited and happy to have with us the author of a book called God Within, The Day God's Train Stopped. And I want to welcome Patti Conklin. Patti, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Susan, for having me today.
I'm excited to see where we go with this conversation. You know, I want everybody to know, I've read the book, and I felt like it was sitting down over a cup of coffee, just having a conversation with you, Patti. I really appreciated a lot of the stories that you shared and what happened because of them and the things that you learned.
Wonderful. I really wanted it to be an easy read, and I thank my son Daniel for doing some of the content editing and simplifying it for me. He did a great job.
It was an easy read for me, and actually there's already a few little pointers I picked up that I've been utilizing within myself and with a couple clients. So I'm grateful to you for that. Thank you.
Beautiful. Awesome.
So so that everybody knows, you're an energy healer, and earlier we were kind of talking about that. Would you share with everybody what that means and what does that look like for you?
What it means specifically for me is I would call myself a vibrational manipulator, except probably wouldn't look good on a business card.
But I like that.
But for me, it's been a lifelong at-birth gift, if you will, where I actually see particles, molecules. And for you, if you would equate it to watching television and having the cable go out and having snow, that's my world. That's the entirety of my world. So when I meet someone, I don't see their facial features. I see their particles that make up their specific being. Particle signatures for individuals are just like our thumbprints. They're unique to every single person. So I may not see your face or your eyes. I'll see the particles that make that up. So if I meet you 5 years from now, even though we're just speaking on the phone, if I were to meet you in person 5 years from now, I would recognize you by your energy signature, not by your facial features.
So it's almost like you're going through life, I want to say it's like you're walking through life blind, but yet you're not at all.
Well, at times I am. Like I could tell you that something is the color green, but I would never be able to tell you what shade of green it is or what shade of brown it is. If I see something that I've never seen before, I have to feel it like a blind person, because I have no reference point to what I actually am looking at. It was cute. I was, had my house remodeled years ago and I had sold it this spring. And as I was walking through with a new couple, they're like, wow, we love that window up there at the top of this room. It's so gorgeous. And I looked up and I went, oh, there's a window there? And I had to change my frequency. It's been 6 years since that window had been put in there. I never saw it.
Wow.
Or if I'm in Ireland tends to have a lot of frequency due to the type of stone. And the first time I went to Ireland, I had to call one of my sons and say, get on the next flight and get out here because I'm totally blind. I don't know if I'm walking off a cliff or out in the middle of traffic or if there's stairs.
That sounds kind of frightening to maneuver in that kind of a world.
It is. I typically, if I get in that kind of a situation, I typically have become very humble and just stop and just yell out and say, if somebody's around, will you come and take my hand and walk me, to the reception desk if it's a 5-star hotel and there's lots of marble and lots of glass and granite. I'm blind the minute I walk in. So I've just learned to ask for help if I'm in that kind of a situation. But I've just learned to adapt because it's been 57 years of it.
So, Patti, this is interesting to me because one of the modalities you work with as a vibrational manipulator is you do color therapy. You work with color. So that's interesting to me that you can't quite see the variations. I dabble as an artist, and so color to me is like so important, all the different shades of it. So how does that work when you're working with clients and the color?
Well, I'm asking them to ask their body what color they need. So I'm not providing the color. My oldest stepson is also an artist, and I never got any of his paintings. I just couldn't make sense of what it was that I was looking at. And it's just humorous for the kids, as teenagers, if I get ready to go out on a date, I just think I'd look awesome, and I'd walk out into the living room where the boys would be sitting, and they'd all just groan, and they're like, who's gonna go dress her now? And I'm like, but I'm matching. Like, no, you're not. You're not even close to matching. I'm like, oh goodness. So it became the family joke of who was gonna dress mom, the next day, or do a TV show, and who was gonna dress her. So color palettes for me are very challenging externally, but it's understanding that color and tone are the only two active frequencies in the universe. Everything else is passive. Whether we're talking crystals or essential oils or Reiki or therapeutic touch or whatever modality you want to look at, they're all passive frequencies. And they assist your external energy fields, and they make you feel better. But they don't literally get the words and emotions that you stored within your cellular structure out. Only tone and color can do that.
So let's touch on this now. Let's go into the idea of words, and I'd like to read something from your book if you don't mind.
No problem.
Okay. You're talking about how our words allow emotions to then settle into our body. So I wanted to just read this. It just touched me. Imagine a whisper of light and tone floating with no form and essence of purity. It evolves the ability to think, to reason, to love and fear, and those things are orchestrated by words. Conditional words transform our souls into a physical form. They're dense, they're heavy, and at that very instant, the spirit becomes a conditional being. It has shed its unconditional self like water from a leaf, and it has taken conditional form. Words have a simple yet profound effect on everyone's life, and I believe there are no exceptions. So right there's like a bunch of stuff we can talk about, Patti. So how the word is made flesh, how the word becomes form, which I personally believe in. The power of my thoughts create my reality inside my body and outside. But there's also this idea of conditional words and unconditional words. So can we tease all that apart?
Sure. Unconditional word is an unconditional statement. And what it means is that there's no emotion attached to the word, and there's no expectation or end result to what the word simply is.
Okay, I think that's
conditional.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just have to interrupt because that's so hard to live.
It is.
No attachment, no judgment, no
judgment. It's. I think it's what they used to call and please excuse me because I haven't had any training in any of this. So all I've heard is stories about Hindus or Buddhists or whatever in terms of truly reaching the observer state, where you truly are out of the expectation and the judgment and the ability to just observe and use that word without any expectation. And I kind of take it back to, you know, again, if you're watching a sunrise and you have no ability to think or to speak or to hear, and you just have sight, it simply is a sunrise. It simply is that. It's your words that make it a breathtaking sunrise, or it's your words that make it a disappointing sunrise. It is your words that is added to the scene that you're looking at visually, or listening to, that makes it a conditional or an unconditional. So an unconditional, I don't even say unconditional love that much anymore, because I think we've gotten very jaded even in the word love.
Yeah.
So I think it's just unconditionalism. And the conditionalism always has a judgment, an attachment, or a emotion that is less than unconditional attached to it. And it's that fear state. It's forgetting every available resource. It's that strength we have inside of us to heal. And it's really looking at our body as this wonderful, wonderful orchestrated mechanism that allows us to, when we're in an unconditional state, because our words store within our subtle energy field, which in science we refer to as our immune system, our words actually flow down the immune system, and an unconditional state strengthens the immune system. In a conditional state, that behavior or that less than unconditional emotion gets stuck. And so let's say that you experience your first temper tantrum when you're 18 months old. I've got an 18-month-old grandson, so he's just learning how to do temper tantrums. But let's say that you have a cold at 18 months and your lungs are compromised. Chances are very good that your temper tantrum will go into the lungs. And so every single time you get angry, from that point on, throughout your lifetime, every time you get angry will then go into your lungs. I know there's a lot of books out there that talk about, you know, emotions go into specific parts of the body. That is the farthest thing from reality as far as I'm concerned, because I've seen it, you know, everywhere. But it really goes into the weakest part of your body in that given point that you first experience it. And it will continue to restore. And I think it's why so many people with disease, let's say cancer, reoccur within 5 years. They reoccur because while they may have done a chemo, radiation, alternative medicine, whatever it was that was working for them, they didn't move the emotion out of the actual immune system. Okay. And without doing that, you really haven't done anything.
So, Patti, I have a couple questions, because as you've been describing all this, I have like this chicken and the egg thing going on within my mind, because I really get about the words flowing in, and if it's with judgment, then they're going to have an adverse effect as opposed to being just free of any kind of icky stuff. But my issue I've always had, and maybe it's just this is how I operate personally, is the emotion happens first before I can name it. Do you know what I mean? I like have the emotion before I can put a word to it. So what do you say about that, Patti? Because, you know, I know lots of people, that's the first thing, is the emotion comes out, the anger or the fear or the grief. And then they're like, oh, I'm feeling this.
Right. It's the emotion first. The emotion's the most important piece, and the emotion attaches to the word. But even if you don't speak the word and you're just feeling the emotion, you know, there still has to be a thought process that I'm upset. I'm not sure what I'm upset about, but I'm upset. So even just that thought process takes that emotion as a frequency and stores it inside of your body before you ever even get to the point where you can articulate it. And it's when, you know, people go into counseling. You know, psychotherapy, talk therapy is wonderful because it helps us understand behavior. But what we don't understand is even in the retelling of the story in talk therapy, and we're abreacting or, we're having a meltdown because we're talking about it again, we're restoring into our body. And so your body recognizes the emotion. Even if we don't have the word attached to it, we have the thought attached to it. And
so this sounds like a little bit like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, where you got to go back to the first cause or the first experience of the emotion that downloads it into your body.
In this way, in using color work to tone work in terms of the frequency, we don't need to know the core event.
Oh, I like that.
It's totally unimportant. And I think we get so caught up in attempting to go back to that originating event. In my work, you don't have to do that. If you have, let's say you have abandonment in your right ovary. Let's say you've been having, discomfort in your right ovary. And if you said to your body, what color do I need to bring into consciousness the emotion behind the pain in my right ovary? And you just let colors flow through your body for 5-6 minutes, maybe journal for a few minutes, and do that for a few consecutive days, maybe 6 to 10 days. And you look at, the constellation at the end of 10 days, you will see exactly what emotion has been stored within the ovary. And so then you can say, what color do I need to remove, abandonment, betrayal from my right ovary? So people may say, okay, I'm hurting here or I have this disease, but I don't know what the origin emotion is, because it's not just enough to move the disease or the pain out. It's understanding what the emotion is. So if you understand what the emotion is, it's no longer necessary to go to the core event, because there's just so much that takes place before we ever become conscious, and so much externally as children that we're fed through our parents. And people really get caught up in that. As adults, they believe one specific thing and they find themselves acting out in a different way, contrary to what they believe. And that's because of programming in their childhood. And so they can simply use color or tone, to go ahead and shake loose the emotion from that cell. It actually stores within the peptide of the cell. And so as you release that, in a very simple exercise, you literally will start, maybe you'll get some diarrhea or get sick to your stomach or run a low-grade fever. My girlfriends say you're the only practitioner I know that people feel worse when they leave you.
Oh, no.
Well, yeah, because they're releasing physical toxins from their body. Once your emotions store within the body, they become matter. They're not just energy any longer. They're actually matter. And when you're releasing it, it releases just like you're releasing a toxin within your body.
And the idea of them becoming matter is because the vibrational or tonal quality becomes denser because it's slowing down.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
I mean, everything is energy until it's not. And it becomes the not when it becomes so dense that energy can no longer flow through it. And once that takes place, then you're really in a situation where then we can label the disease. And, Susan, seriously, if you think about 100 years ago, before we had microscopes, or 150 years ago, people had a bum knee, they had a bad back, and they generalized their symptoms. In today's world, because we're so good at labeling different symptoms and different cell structures and different diseases, that the fear of getting breast cancer is enough to create the breast cancer.
Hello.
If the fear is strong enough.
Hello, yeah.
Yeah. And so many people just don't think about that. Oh my goodness, my mother had it, my grandmother had it, my great grandmother had it, and so therefore it's hereditary and I must have it. No, that's not the case at all.
I have a college friend I just spoke with last weekend who was having an MRI done and then was going to have a colonoscopy because she's being diagnosed with something with her colon, and she's was trying not to freak out because cancer runs in her family, blah, 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 blah. And I was talking to her, and as I was talking to her, I was like, well, what else is going on in your life? Well, she's selling her house of 40 years. She's downsizing. She's possibly moving out of the country to live with the love of her life in France. And I listened to this and I said, oh my goodness, you have none of that physical stuff is true. You're just letting go of all this other stuff. So just, allow yourself to go through it. And she called me the next day. She goes, I can't even believe how much better I feel just in recognizing that is most likely what it is. I said, yeah, and you're going to get the rest of your test done. But please, of course, it's a big deal to do all that kind of stuff.
It's a big deal, and people, get fearful. I mean, we go to the doctor because whatever, and the doctor legally has to tell you everything that can be wrong. And then we go home, and in the day of the internet, we start Googling and searching all of the different symptoms or all the different names and labels that the doctor gave us, and we will typically hit on the one that makes us the most scared. And you're like, oh no, I hope it's not this, in your body, because it has no discernment capabilities, goes, oh, you're worried about this? Oh, okay, I can create that for you. And so many different diseases are actually developed because of that. If we have someone call the office and for a consult with me and they say, oh, I found a lump in my breast this morning, do you think it's cancer? My response is, well, do you want it to be cancer?
Right.
Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, you have a choice here. Do you want it to be cancer or not cancer? Go get a mammogram, and let's talk about the results after you come back. Because by that point, they're already fearful, and the only thing that's going to take most people out of that fear zone is to go ahead and get the mammogram. But I know the power of my words, and if I said to that person, yeah, I'm really seeing some dark energy there, and there's not much movement, and I'm concerned, if they didn't have cancer before they called, they'll have cancer by the time they hang up.
Yep. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And it's all about, in the book you talk about perception, that it's all of our perceptions that are, I have another quote, Patti, if you will, allow me.
Sure.
You said perceptions are based off our histories, and because we're the only ones that experience that exact history, no one else can hold the same perception. And our ability to set and maintain perceptions is the key to our physical and emotional wellness. How we speak and feel is literally absorbed into ourselves. So it's so important to pay attention to how we perceive things.
Oh, so important. So important. I think that I just can't stress that enough. Second to emotions, the perception that we have is paramount to how we're going to experience our life. And understanding that if our life, it's remembering that every moment we've had in our life, we chose the meaning to be experienced. And, life in and of itself is meaningless. When we were given life, however that happened, we were not given meaning to life. And so every event we have, we're going to choose the emotion. And so if we have a perception of our childhood, let's say, that maybe wasn't so great, you learned something from that childhood. So begin shifting your perception so that you can look at the good that was learned from that childhood instead of saying with the negative or the bad. And as soon as you begin doing that, you'll begin to see the domino effect of your whole life and perceptions beginning to change. I fly approximately 100,000 miles a year teaching.
Wow.
And I've done that for 30 years now. So 30 years of being on planes and, being in 63 different countries and being all over. And people will say, how do you manage not to get sick when you're in the airplane so much? And I remember the first time being asked that, just looking at them going, why would I ever assume I would get sick?
Right.
If the person sitting next to me has the flu, they have the flu because there's something emotionally going on inside of them. It has nothing to do with me. If I'm in India or I'm somewhere, I drink the local water. I don't have a belief that that water is going to make me sick. I'll just change my frequency into the frequency of the people in the water, and so therefore I'm not going to get dysentery or get ill. So I think it's just really understanding the power we have to look at the situations in our life and change how we're perceiving it so that it's a big adventure. It's just this huge adventure no matter what you're facing. Make it an adventure instead of something that is trying for you.
Yeah, okay, Patti, that's easier said.
No, it becomes a way of life. It really does. I remember, just looking at life. I typically take off a couple of times a year. I'll pack my suitcase and go sit at the airport and decide where I'm going to go. And for me, it's that adventure. Even if I'm going into a hot spot somewhere in the world, I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at it as the perception of what it is. Now, some people can call me naive, but I think that I don't go in with rose-colored glasses. I pay attention to whether or not I'm in a safe area or a non-safe area. But if I'm in a non-safe area, I don't go into panic. I just move into an area where I'm safe. And I think that people, for the most part, can start catching themselves when they start getting fearful or they start getting agitated and move into a better perception, and their world then shifts for them.
Okay, so since you brought up the traveling thing, I'm just trying to comprehend how do I apply that, because I understand what you're saying from a mental POV. If I can change my perspective, if I can become aware that the fear is just an indicator that there's something within me that needs to shift.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, so let me talk from the I POV. When I am caught in that fear thing, it is so hard, at least up until today, it's so hard for me to unwind that fear and calm down. I automatically am on this, train going nowhere fast of amping up.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, my son and I were traveling back from Paris to the States, and we had to catch the tube to get to the airport in Paris. And except we were leaving so early, there was nobody to give us a ticket for the subway. And we had our heavy suitcases and going up and down stairs, and I started to panic. And my son kept saying, "It's okay, Mom, it's all going to work out." But I couldn't even read the signs by then. I had freaked out. And somehow we got on the train without a ticket. Somehow we got off the train and got into the airport and got on the right plane without any extra outer assistance,
Right.
But
right.
I was so panicked, I couldn't make it stop. And I'm a practitioner of this stuff.
Right. Right.
So I know for people, when you say about changing your frequency too, there's a whole bunch of other things besides just the mind game.
It is. It's, taking that deep breath. I always remind myself there's always going to be another plane. There's always going to be another plane. There's always another flight. So if I'm hitting that heavy time travel, but I think it's giving yourself permission to really understand how brilliant you are, and how again, fear is forgetting every available resource, and that it's that strength that's inside of you, and all of us can tap into it. I think it's taking those deep breaths and saying, what's the worst that could happen right now? I remember going into Honduras. I was in Honduras and I was going into Nicaragua when I was Women in Literacy Director. And as I was still on the Honduran border, and I was at a small border crossing and I was by myself, I could hear the Nicaraguan guards, and they were actually talking about raping and killing me. So I was a single, blonde female crossing, and there was nobody else there. And so I stopped, obviously, did not put my foot down on Nicaraguan soil, but I had to get into Nicaragua. So I went back into Honduras to the nearest town, and I hired 2 local thugs with guns to take me across the border, and paid him $1,000. And I got back, and the CEO comes in my office. He's like, "What's this $1,000 on your expense report?" So, well, I had to get into Nicaragua, and I was going to be in trouble if I stepped across that border. So I went back and hired two guys to escort me across with guns, and I got in because I had work to do. And he just shook his head and he said, "Only you." and I'm like, well, but that made perfect sense to me. So I think that it's really understanding, no matter what situation you're in, first, take that deep breath. But secondly, remind yourself that what's the worst that could happen, truly. In most situations, it's not a life or death situation. What's the worst that could happen? And when you begin to realize that it's not the enormity that your mind has made it become, or if things are kind of falling apart and everything's just, moving off and you don't seem to have control, understand that you're in a growth period. And if you can look at that effect as just the growth that it is, you're learning something incredibly important in that moment. And if you seize that moment and look at it as a power surge within yourself of, wow, I've got this handled. I've really got this handled. And give yourself kudos when you get on the other side and you've gotten it taken care of. Give yourself the kudos. Then the next event is going to be less likely to be as traumatizing for you. But it has to start somewhere.
Right.
And so just, even if it's that tiny little footstep, you give yourself the kudos and the thanks, that you had the smarts to do it. And it doesn't take a genius to do it. It doesn't take anyone, of extraordinary intelligence. It's a day-to-day of how we view our life. And take those baby steps, because those baby steps are just as important as those big steps.
Patti Conklin, I'm appreciating this conversation. You're listening to Living Your Inspired Life. Hi, this is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village. You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you. And welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell, and I'm talking to Patti Conklin, the author of God Within. And Patti, right before break, you started to talk about how when we have challenging experiences in our lives, or fearful or anger-provoking, that generally those are growth periods. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So I got to say, I'm raising my hand. I am just so tired of the growth period all the time in my life.
They can be challenging. They really can be. And it's just the way I get through it is understanding that A, I am going to get through it. And B, I stay focused on what it is that I'm learning. And it's hard. It can be challenging for all of us. This fall, my ex-husband was dying, and so I was arranging a hospice for him and spending as much time as I could with him. And my dad was dying, and I was arranging hospice for him and spending as much time as I could in New York. And my two closest male friends were also dying and spending as much time as I could in ICU with them. And in the midst of all of this, my daughter-in-law has a placenta rupture, and I get a text from my son at 1:15 in the morning when I'm in New York arranging hospice. Doctors believe baby will live, trying to save Esther now.
And, good God.
And I'm just in the midst of all of this. And I had to keep breathing. I just had to keep breathing. And, I'm like, okay, I'm going to fly home because obviously, we've got an emergency. The baby's, 7 weeks early and so on and so forth. And so I called my sons. I didn't know what had happened. And I called my sons and I'm like, I will fly home, in a few hours as soon as I can catch a flight. And they're like, look, we've got things covered. All of us are taking turns with the baby in NICU and there's 7 of us here and we've got things covered and you do what you need to do. And so I had to keep reminding myself to breathe. And in the space of a 5-month period, 12 of my family members and closest friends died. And most of the male, input in my life was leaving. And so, and I still had to teach and I still had to be in Bavaria for 3 weeks and just, life happened. And so I sat with myself going, what is it that I'm learning with all of these deaths? And as soon as the last death of my closest friend of 20 years took place, on March 6th, and I did his eulogy, the day after I had decided to sell my house sold that day. And all of a sudden I was letting go of my house. I was letting go of all of these people that I loved and, and everybody had passed and I started giving away all of my items in my home that I had forever. I kept my terracotta warrior from China and my Persian bed and everything else I gave to charity. And so what I learned was there was all of a sudden a freedom of movement for me, that not only was I not held down by material things, but the people that I loved and had such a, lifetime of relationships with, had moved on. And it was opening doors for me that I never would have imagined needed to be opened. And that was amazing to me once I got through the grief and stayed focused with what is it that I'm learning from all of this? How am I growing? How are these deaths serving me? And while I certainly can miss them, it has opened doors and opened up opportunities that I don't think ever would have come my way, because I would have been still stuck in the same old of, flying 100,000 miles a year and just working and being focused on the immediate right now. It shifted my world completely. And I give thanks for that. And that doesn't mean I miss people any less. But I give thanks for the new adventure I'm on, which is living on a houseboat, on a beautiful lake.
Have you always been such a positive person, Patti?
I think I have been, only because I didn't realize I shouldn't say I didn't realize how not to be. I came from a very dysfunctional family. And at the age of 7 is when I had what I considered to be a visitation. And I realized as long as I listened to that voice, I would be okay. And by the time I was 12, I understood I was beyond my parents' comprehension to understand me. And I pretty much moved out at the age of 12. So, for me, life had become that adventure. And it's not that I haven't gone through those hard times, but, when I have gone through them, I've sat with them and said, okay, as a practitioner, it's not that we're not going to go through it. It's how long we choose to stay down.
Right.
And so I immediately look at, what am I learning? This is incredibly painful. What am I learning from this experience? Because duality has to exist. And I don't know how good I can be until I understand how bad I can be. So when challenges come into life, I sit and look at, what am I learning from this experience, and take it from there. Because, being negative or being in a state of conditionalism for me is a very heavy burden. And I also believe as a practitioner, you live by example and you teach by example. And so if something really hits me incredibly hard, I will stop work immediately. And if I need to take a month away from everyone in order to get my head wrapped around what just took place and be by myself, then that's what I do.
Well, it sounds like you've just grown huge self-care from the age of 12.
Yeah.
Recognizing, it sounds like the most beautiful part of the child within you is the one that remains fascinated by the journey and the playfulness of it.
I think so. I mean, I remember calling my son a few years ago, and I had decided to go hiking in the Amazon. And so I just kind of did a conference call. I'm like, well, I'm going to be gone a couple of weeks and I'm going to go hiking in the Amazon. And my son Daniel said, are you going to hire a guide? And I'm like, no. And he's like, did you meet a guy? And I'm like, no. And he's like, what are you doing? And I said, I want to hike in the Amazon for 2 weeks. And my son Matthew said, let's get real. What if you get raped? And I said, Matt, let's get real. What if I wake up in the middle of the night and there's a spider on me? I mean, now we're talking dangerous drama. And they both just started laughing, and Dan just said, are you ever going to grow up? And I said, I doubt I will. Because the world is such an incredible place, and there's so many beautiful people. And, for people who don't travel a lot, they don't understand that when you get out of the big city, in I don't care what country I'm in, people will come out of their homes and ask me if I need a place to stay or if I need some food. And so I think the journey for me, it's not that there hasn't been pain, because there's definitely been pain, but I think it's how we view it. And when my closest friends, 20 years passed in March, a couple of weeks before I passed, he had a little bit of lucidity, and he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to make it, am I? And I'm like, no. And he said, how's Karen doing, his wife? And I said, she's okay. She understands that you're not going to recover. And I said, but, while we're talking about this, why don't we make arrangements for someone else to officiate your funeral? Because I just feel like it's a little too much right now. Dad just died, Jack just died, and he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, oh, suck it up. And I just started giggling. And I kept thinking about that as I was officiating his funeral. No matter how painful it was, every time I got to a place where I felt like I was going to cry, I just heard him say that. And made me just kind of smile, and I continued through the service. So life happens, and it happens to all of us, and it can be pretty severe at times. But I think that it's just remembering that there's something good that's taking place also. And sometimes you've got to dig really deep to find it, but it's there. And it changes the whole frequency of who you are.
So let's talk a little bit about the frequency thing, Patti, because you've mentioned it several times, and I just want it to be clarifying for our listeners, because I believe that we are energy, as you do, and I do comprehend when I'm with certain people, I can tell when I don't feel good. Now that's a frequency, yeah? That's a vibing up with their vibration. Okay, now I'm sounding really woo. But so speak a little bit about the frequencies and how do people begin to pay attention to them if they're not paying attention?
Well, it's just what you said, being around people and beginning to not feel good. People through the years have said, oh, that's it's an energy vampire, they're psychically attacking. No, they just have they have a different frequency than you. And so what you do is simply, this is so easy, just close your eyes and think of that person. See that person that you're really exhausted being around. Mm-hmm. See that person and in your mind's eye, just begin to view them and go deeper into their heart center, into what would be their subtle energy field. And what you'll find is that you immediately shift into their frequency and you no longer feel exhausted because now you're merging with them.
Oh, wait, but do I want to do that if it's somebody that I don't feel good being around?
Absolutely.
Why?
Absolutely, because you're not feeling good because the frequencies are off. And that doesn't mean that they're good or bad. My frequency is very high. The BBC has filmed me turning into a white light when I raise my frequency. So I could say, wow, well, the most of society then feels pretty bad because y'all feel heavy. No, it's my job to then change my frequency to whoever I'm around so that I merge with them, and you'll begin to see them in a totally different light. Because it's remembering from the soul's aspect. You came from exactly the same place at exactly the same time. I wasn't born with more gifts than you were born with. We were born identical in my mind, in my view of the world. And so if I'm with someone that I don't really feel good around, then I will merge my frequency in with them and I'll see them in a totally different way. And I may actually just totally enjoy who they are. But if I keep my frequency separate, or sometimes you need to raise your frequency, to reach someone else, you'll see things about them you never noticed before. It's amazing.
I love this. I love this idea. It's causing me to rethink how I interact with people, because generally the people that feel ooey to me are the ones I don't want to be around. I don't want to merge with them. But
right.
What you just described makes sense, and it's true. So I'm looking at this as having just gotten out of a long-term marriage, and what I found is we were so entwined energetically, it took me a good year and a half to disengage that.
Yes.
And and so what do I want to say about that, Patti? I guess the merging thing is how do you do it so that you're not stuck with them?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at it this way. Every soul has its own purpose. Every soul has its own path. And because you're not that soul, you don't know what the path is. And so when you're coming out of a situation like that, a long-term relationship that, maybe wasn't quite so good towards the end, you separate yourself, but you understand that that year and a half that it took you to get out of it, there were probably energy shards, exchanged energy between the two of you that needed to be dislodged. And once you can do that, and you can look at this person as a soul, not as a human being, but as a soul, and say, you know what, as a soul, we came from exactly the same place, and I respect you. And while I may not be walking the same path with you in terms of our human consciousness, as a soul, I will respect you because we're equal. And that changes, believe it or not, it will change the consciousness. You may not want to be around that person, but you'll choose to not be around that person out of discernment and not judgment.
Right.
And there's a huge difference. And you want to be able to look at them with discernment. So, hey, they're walking a path I'm not interested in.
Yeah.
But I actually, as a soul, they're awesome. And it begins shifting how you're thinking about that person.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. It's giving me food for thought for later.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit also about the esteem issue that comes with the vibration, the lower or higher vibration. So if you begin to raise your vibration, now, okay, I'm sorry, I'm backing up. How do you raise your vibration personally?
Personally, you need to, continue to work on removing past emotions out of your body so that your body becomes a clear channel, and you can do that using color or tone. And, for me, when I'm out in public, I lower my frequency because if I walked into a room with my normal frequency, virtually everyone in the room would start crying because I'd hit them emotionally within themselves with the frequency. So for everyone, it's a matter of, imagining your heart center, which sits on top of your thymus gland, and being able to see metal doors and begin to open up those metal doors, just kind of push them like a barn door, push them out so that the light that's building up inside of you can come out and not only flow outside of you, but all the way through your body. And that will raise your frequency. That will begin to raise your frequency. And the way you sustain it is changing how you think about things and no longer look at things as a negative or a positive, but simply as the observer. And go back in on a daily basis and get rid of some of the junk that you've stored there throughout your lifetime.
It sounds pretty simple, Patti. Yeah,
It
no,
really is. It really is. And I think that's why it works, is because it is so simple.
I don't have to go to a cave and ohm my way to bliss on a mountain somewhere, and then I like that.
I loved it when my kids were teenagers and they asked me why I wasn't levitating. Because, I would curdle the milk and I'd sweeten the milk and they'd be screaming at 1 o'clock in the morning because maybe I forgot to, put it back to normal taste or, bending on the silverware or whatever. And they used to tease me and say, why aren't you levitating? And I said, because I'm not sitting in a cave in the Himalayas for 18 hours a day, practicing on, God gave me, 6 of you to raise and, I've got all of you and I've got the mortgage and I've got the electric bill and, I don't have time for that. And I think the true path of spirituality, the true path of being a good person is how do we stay in an unconditional state no matter what's taking place in our life? And how do we push that light energy out? Not because somebody needs it, but because somebody might use it. Because remember, if we decide that somebody needs help, then we're making a judgment, aren't we? That they need help. But if we leave that light source open and let their soul take it and utilize it, then they're the ones making the decision, and we're not making a judgment that they need it. And again, we're staying in a discernment state.
A discernment state, yes.
Yeah. No emotional or expectation and result. And it's truly living that on a day-to-day basis. If one of the kids come and say, oh, gee, this baby's being so expensive and, we need to borrow some money. In my mind, if I give money, it's because I have no expectation that it's coming back. None. And so there's no promises of I'll make this kind of payment or whatever. If they choose to pay back, awesome. And if they choose not to pay back, awesome. But once I've made that decision in my mind, it never lingers of, oh, gee, they owe me money. I wonder why they haven't paid me back. So I set myself up in a place where I'm not going to do something because I feel I should do something or I have to do something. I do it because I want to do it. And that's the only time I'll do it.
I'm telling you, Patti, you've got such a healthy attitude about life. I have a 20-year-old son, and I had to talk one of my girlfriends, whose son is also 20, off the ceiling a couple days ago because school started. They've all signed up for classes, and she found out her son hadn't paid for his classes, which he wasn't in class. And she went ballistic, and she called me and, said, you've got to talk me off because I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. And she was, and I could feel her anger and disappointment. And it that whole thing of expectation and judgment about the other person, and then what you just said about I'm going to share it because I choose to. There's so many of us that are not clear on what we want. We think we're clear because, like my friend, she thinks she knows what she wants, and what she wants is for her son to graduate from college. And I said, but what if that's not what he wants, even though he's trying his best to do what you want?
Well, it's remembering one thing in all of that equation. I can only control me. That's it. I can only control me in this space and moment. In this second, I can control me. I can't control what took place a minute ago, and I can't control what takes place a minute from now. So how on earth am I going to decide that I can control someone else? And I think it's really looking back. I mean, my kids were really torn because, their father's an engineer and, all of his family have been professors at, Ivy League schools. And so they had the pressure to go to college and, become engineers and teachers and whatever. And then they had mom.
Right.
And, mom's kind of mom. And so they were really torn for so much of their life about, do we take the college route? Mom makes a lot more money. She has a lot easier life. I mean, she can take off and go where she wants to go. Maybe that's the way to go. And I had to sit down with them and say, you know what? Each of you have an individual path. And, they're in their early 30s now, and they each have a child. My biological son, each have little boys now who are, 20 and 22 months old. And Daniel has a great job, and he did maybe 3 semesters of college, much to his dad's disappointment. But I'm like, if that's what feels right. And Matthew, at the age of 31, who's most like me in my gift, and certainly takes over a lot of the work and has been executive director for me for years, has decided to go back to school for robotic engineering.
Oh, good grief! And that's a brilliant emphasis for somebody of that.
Yeah. And so it was kind of like, so, he's juggling things. And I said, look, why don't you let me pay for your living expenses, while you're in school? And he's like, well, because, that's quite a hardship for you. And I said, at this space and time in my life, I can afford it. And I would like to be able to assist you. You still assist me. You still do a lot of follow-ups. You run the office when I'm on vacation. You handle everything for me. I think that this is a time for me to give back. And certainly my move here to this area of Georgia was for them. Dan
so, Patti,
and
I'm sorry, we're almost out of time.
Oh, geez.
But
goodness.
I know it goes by fast, doesn't it? Especially when you're having fun.
It does.
But I want you, do you have a website or a phone number for people if they want to contact you?
Yep. They can go to PattiConklin.com, and it's PattiConklin.com. And God Within is at Amazon and Barnes & Nobles and local bookstores around the country. And, it's just my philosophies. It doesn't mean I'm right. It's just my philosophies of life.
Well, I feel that our time together has been just so fast and furious, and I so greatly appreciate you joining us today on Living Your Inspired Life. So I'm just going to say, and so it is, namaste.